the European Union are supposed to be open access. IDRCs also, Canada, you are quite advanced. You've got those direct, not just statements, but you've implemented to say if a researcher has to apply, then you recommend that they apply via open access modalities. And of course, within the other movements, another example is the statement that was done jointly with these different movements, the large ones in Sao Paulo in 2019, where all the funding, these big movements on open science came together with a statement that promoted the need for open access. And of course, with that, there's other aligned news aligned to open access and open science. Within South Africa, as I said, we don't yet have that policy, but there's been lots of discussions. From 2018, there was a publication that was developed as a result of a dialogue that South Africa had with the EU, very detailed, looking at the status quo as well of South Africa and some of the recommendations that South Africa needs to take as steps towards achieving that open science of the system. Within the NRF as well, we've got statements. For instance, we've had a statement since 2015 that encourages publications to be of research that's funded by the NRF being the prominent funder of research and students in South Africa, to just promote that need for funding that comes from the NRF. Researchers are using it being open access. However, it's a statement. It's not monitored, and it's still not a policy. So as a statement, anyone can use it or cannot use it, and we don't monitor it. So we want to move away from the movement, the statement, which are very good, the next one, and packing those into actual programs that support researchers to, that enable researchers to start taking up or adopt open science programs and principles. Universities, as I said earlier on, they are quite in a lead. If you look at University of Cape Town, they've developed quite a very holistic open science agenda, which speaks of the why of open science. And besides that, under each why, for instance, we speak of being efficient or being innovative, there's the benefits linked to that. How is the university benefiting? How is the science system benefiting? It's a very good model. I recommend you look at it. It's very good in terms of schematic, and it's very direct with regards to the why, the how, and the benefits aligned to that from the perspective of the university. Within South Africa as well, there's been quite a lot of advancement in terms of, if you pick an example of open access, in terms of the use of open access, you find that over the last 5 years or so, there's been an increase in terms of publications in open access journals. This trend is reflected if you look at most countries in the continent compared to other regions, where there's an increasing trajectory aligned to that. That, of course, might be linked to different scenarios. In the case of South Africa, it might be the universities that are driving towards driving or pushing the researchers to publish more in open access. The other one might be tied to the financials aligned to publishing in non-open access publications, which is quite prohibited. It's quite expensive. Example, last week I was just doing an inquiry on publishing a book with Springer, which I've published quite a number of books with them. One publication of a book is quoted around, if you want to publish it under open access, it's quoted around 300 to 400,000 rands, which is almost 15,000 US dollars. One book costs very expensive if you want to use the open access route and use these very well-known publishers. Whether we can afford it as funders, then how do we support the system from the university and the researchers to start implementing open access? That's just a sketch of the universities and their publication, open access publication over just an overview. Now, I want to spend much more time on the NRF. As I said, we don't have a policy as an organization. So there's a lot of that drive that we are doing. We've done lots of consultation. We've developed the baseline documents. We've got a draft framework that will become a strategy and pull policies out of it. And the whole idea is to try and come up with a mechanism that is able to support the science system in South Africa just beyond the movements. And this includes looking at a few elements of open science, on policies, open data, etc. And then as well as to come up with a measurable increase. So have that targeted mission-oriented approach where we're saying between 2022 as an example, in the next 5 years from then, we want X number of publications to be open access. We're also trying to drive the issues around the sharing of research data as well as issues around research impact, because it's very intrigued or interlinked with open science, where we're trying to promote the use of engaging the research that's being done by the researchers, engaging that with broader society so that it can have a bigger impact at the end of the day in terms of the research that's funded and it being accessed by the broader public. So it's quite holistic, but the purpose is to try to use open science as a driver towards research impact for the system. As I showed in my second slide, if you look at open science, it's a mesh. It's got lots of legs to it. Our approach that we want to use from the NRF is a phased approach where we want to start with a few core elements of open science that we can drive, for instance, in the next 5 years that speak to the mandate of the National Research Foundation. At the moment, these 4 have been identified. Open access. Why? Because the NRF is the funder of research in South Africa, as well as we fund students. Secondly, open data, because we fund research. Besides funding research, the NRF is one of the few funding organizations that funds and conducts research through our national facilities. And we've got lots of facilities in terms of data facilities that we use for the research that the NRF provides for the country. Issues around open review and evaluation. Why? Because as well, the NRF funds and we review a lot of publications. So just looking at how do we drive that the culture of programs aligned to open reviews. This might speak of e.g. as an example, making reviewers' names public. So not single, but both double blinded kind of review, where the reviewers and the author, they know each other. So that's the discussion. It's not yet conclusive, but just trying to weigh those type of things within the NRF, within the South African system. And besides that, as we're looking at who reviews. So we have large programs that we have, like large at the end of our program, at the end of our funding, we've got these 5 15-year programs aligned to the research chairs that in the review process, for instance, we use industry stakeholders or other stakeholders to be part of that panel for reviewing whatever proposal application that we have. So that now links to the issues around impact and using open reviews and evaluation, open science for impact. The last one is basically linked with trying to align the system on the different open science policies. As I said, each university runs with its own policies on open science. That's a disadvantage because we are not speaking with one voice. Good example is aligned with if you're negotiating with publishers on open access. Most publishers, they use the approach of isolate, conquer. They know the different institutions, they've got their own mandate. They'll negotiate a contract with University of Cape Town, and that's it. They go to University of UKZ and University of KwaZulu-Natal, they'll negotiate a contract, and then that's it. So we're not speaking as a system. Besides that, another good example is with regards to the NRF. NRF is a funder of research, but we don't have or we don't fund any incentives on open science. We've got another department under the bigger ministry, the Department of Higher Education. They give block grants to universities to encourage them to publish broadly, not just open science. So we've got these two policies, these two institutions that don't talk to each other. We are the NRF, we don't have resources to provide incentives, and then we've got this other department that's providing. So we are that space as well where we're trying to speak at the next in terms of how we can align to leverage resources. Now just quickly run through, I'm sure I'm running out of time. So some of the key components around the roadmap, I've mentioned a lot of them already. The first one is aligned to trying to have this holistic approach when you speak of negotiation around open science, especially if you look at open science or open access, you can't just move at that quick pace. It needs time. So within that space of time, how do we have this holistic or synergetic approach as we are negotiating all these contracts with the publishers? That requires the strong link between the government, the funders like the NRF, the universities, the researchers, and that discussion as well shouldn't exclude the publishers. They're well established, they've got the infrastructure of this holistic approach. Priorities with the government, universities, and science councils, I think it should be given top priority. In most instances, we work in isolation, but that's just a re-emphasis to say we need these agreements that, look at it at a national level, and we use the little resources that we have working with partners outside Africa as well to push for the agenda. And as well, just that leveraging and engagement with stakeholders like what we're doing now with IDRC, with colleagues from International Science Council, core data, that builds confidence in itself with the researchers to say, we are not starting from the ground. A lot has been done with other entities, with other organizations. How do we get those models and implement them in our own environment, of course, guided by these recommendations that UNESCO has put up. And then the issue around communication, if you look at open science, one of the biggest challenges is the communication and the understanding. It's complex, but it's very simple. But the understanding from most academics, you ask them about open science broadly, even the policy angle, most of them, what comes to mind if you speak of open science is just open access and to some extent aligned to the library. So we just need to get that bigger picture as well. If we speak of open science, as it was explained a lot of times in the morning, it's holistic. It's speaking of sharing of data, sharing of publications. It's speaking of the reviews. It's linked to impact and how we evaluate the proposals or the funding that we give out. And the link as well to try to speak of open science even beyond the science environment, to now link it to how we are responding to the needs of society and communicating that. Through that, we have much more leverage power and we get much more resources from governments and broadly outside. I highlighted that need for clear guidelines when negotiating at a country level, instead of using the approach of each university is on its own and running on its own agenda with these agreements. On the ground, what are we doing?
To wrap up, sorry, Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, that's my last slide, I think. Thanks a lot. What we've done at the end of the day, so we've painted the picture with regards to what we want to do, what we want to focus on, those 4 areas. We've consulted internally. We're starting now an approach of consulting with universities and other stakeholders in South Africa. The propositions, I've just picked a few ones, is those 5 ones there. So the first one is speaking of if NRF, any application that if you want to apply for the NRF, you need to stipulate any open science policies that you have. We have guidelines in terms of what those means. Similar with the grant agreement, after we funded, the grant agreement has to be clear with regards to open science, and the applicant or the successful applicant has to be aware of it and have to abide by it. So it has to be not just a statement, but it has to be monitored and it has to be implemented. We need as well to develop very strong monitoring and evaluation systems, because it's no point having all these platforms if you're not monitoring what you're doing. And then the second leg, the fourth leg of it as well is the need to encourage this sharing of data within the universities. We do acknowledge that as an NRF, we don't want it to be centralized because we don't have the capacity to do that. So just putting a clause in whatever agreement that universities can have their own platform. It's either their own platform or they can use other platform in the cloud. But the bottom line is they need to have those repositories and they can share the data that they have with other communities. And then the issue around incentives, this is a sticky point. As I said, we've got two departments doing two different things. We need to think of, e.g., open access. It's open, it's not free. Where do we get money to fund it? So this now needs us to start engaging with the other department and other stakeholders in universities in terms of how we can leverage each other's resources to build and to implement all these activities on open science holistically from the national perspective, leveraging on each other's strengths. Thanks a lot. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Merci cette question sur les enjeux à niveau national. Professor Bolton, how is it looking on your end? Should we skip to?
No, I think we're okay. If
okay.
If you can enable chair share.
Yeah. Pouvez-vous donner les permissions à professeur Bolton pour partager son écran, s'il vous plaît? Okay.
Recording in progress.
I think you're good to go. And I'll send you a little note in the chat when you're 5 minutes up.
That's PowerPoint, yes. So, did I do that?
No. Cancel this. Tell me what a problem.
Okay, shall I open that?
No. Okay, try that.
Then I get this, you see.
No.
Mathieu? Monsieur Wallace?
Oui, je suis là.
Oui, normalement, c'est OK pour le professeur Bolton.
Oui, c'est bon, il est juste en train de trouver le bon écran, je crois. Donc,
I think I'm going to have to email my slides to you.
Okay. So yeah, email them to me and I'll advance them during your talk. But why don't we move in the meantime to my colleague Paul, if that's okay with you, Paul. Est-ce qu'on peut donner la permission changer la permission pour Paul Ocui, s'il vous plaît?
Right. Can I go? Or we wait to hear from Prof?
Go ahead, yes.
Okay, thank you. So I will be talking about IDRC's experience in drafting our data management plan and how we've used that to date. My talk will not be based on a presentation, so I'll just talk through the processes and the steps that we've gone through and where we are to date. So I'll look at it from three perspectives. The first one is the learning, how we prepared ourselves to learn to support open science. The second bit will be focusing on the research bit and the planning process. Then how we develop the policy, and then the final stage, which is now on testing and refining and doing further learning. Like my colleague from the NRF, we basically try to look at how to raise awareness within communities, our research communities, in terms of what opportunities researchers have, and then the kind of support that they would be required to have. As you know, in the developing South, we really have major challenges getting our data, our science out there in an open manner. So we still have challenges. I need not talk about IDRC. I believe many of the participants know that we basically initiate research, we encourage, we support and conduct research into problems of developing countries. And that means that we have to apply and adapt scientific and technical knowledge to the development challenges of these regions. So we, using our mandate, we basically find ourselves interacting with researchers from different parts of the continent. Like I said, researchers from the North basically are very, very well versed with open data process, open science processes. Researchers from the southern part of the world are still grappling or understanding how to get to open data processes given the infrastructure constraints. So we need to think about incentives, we need to think about organizations, and push a little beyond what we currently have. So I will talk about the learning as the initial point. Now, this learning involved an initial environmental scan, which happened somewhere in 2014. And then we did a policy development. And like I said, we went through the testing and refining process. So in 2014, based on a directive from the government of Canada and other external partners, we did realize that there was need for open data sharing, open science, but then we lacked the infrastructure. So internally, we did a sampling of grantees and found that less than 10% of IDRC-funded research projects had or actually made intentions to have their data shared openly. And yet, we thought that initially, this would have been a bigger sample. So we looked at the materials, we looked at the trainings and capacity building aspects, and found that it was important for us to integrate open science into our research granting process. And this led to the formulation of an open data working group, formulated somewhere in 2016. And the mandate of this group within IDRC was to develop an approach for improving open data management, but also sharing practices, sharing of data in within IDRC grantees. So we had a first pilot sometime in 2015 and 2016. And in this pilot, we basically were interested in two dimensions. First of all, was to understand what was going on outside IDRC, what was happening in terms of the practice of open science and its impact on science. We also wanted to understand the policies and the policy actors who are shaping and supporting open data. And then we wanted to know who are the researchers and organizations that are actually supporting this. But internally, we also had issues that we wanted to deal with. First was raising the awareness of staff and having them being able to advise grantees, and then also how to support open data goals. Now, this was based on the premise that most of the research data that we had collected as IDRC through our grantees actually disappeared. We didn't know what was happening to it. And we set out with a mission to make sure that from the period 2015, 2020, most of the data or all the data that we should be collecting must be preserved for future use. And we were also interested in shifting incentives, making the data accessible to whoever wanted to validate research findings. And we wanted to know what would this have in terms of its impact on science, its impact on policy over time. Now, the basis of this was that we realized that sharing actually made it more transparent in terms of putting quantitative work out. It gave credibility to the research findings that we supported. It helped to build on existing studies because a number of our projects were phased into, for example, phase 1, phase 2. It also helped us to replicate where necessary. And it also reduced costs because in cases where researchers wanted to replicate studies, we didn't have to fund another data collection process. So that was very, very instrumental, and it helped us develop the interest and insights but we were lacking internal mechanisms to support this process. So as a result, we decided to, like I said, rely on internal and external approaches. And our findings externally showed that most of the journals in the different areas did not actually initially have open data access to the, allow researchers or readers to access the data. And we wanted to be part of the process of that, what would change this. So internally, we were also thinking of partnerships. We approached a number of partners who were already well versed with what was going on in the open science area. And our interest again was to understand the objectives, see what kind of guidance we would get from these, and also how best we could make our data accessible and our research findings accessible to the external world. So this process led us into those that were having data that could be developed into accessible data, and then those that did not have. The challenge that my colleague, Dr. Sepo, talked about was basically lack of repositories. We find that in the region, if there is a researcher who would like to put his data out, there are no repositories within the developing world. Most of the repositories are based in the developed world, and yet we have constraints accessing some of these. So we're looking into some of these as opportunities for us to contribute towards this. Now, so after the research and planning process, we moved on to what I would call phase one. And we commissioned a project, and this project was basically to explore opportunities and challenges for implementing open research strategies. Now, the purpose here was to get case studies that would help us in terms of data management and planning. It was also to boost dialogue and exchange between research teams and program staff, and then draw some lessons which could be useful for us in terms of building the way forward or the pathway towards open data access. Now, this project that we commissioned gave us some quick observations. First of all, we realized that data management and sharing requires a lot of changes in terms of the process. So we needed to do upfront planning. We didn't really have to take the grantees by ambush. Two, we realized that there was need for organizational support and infrastructure. We needed to look at the ethics, we needed to look at the context, we needed to look at the needs. And three, we needed to build the capacity of our own program staff. And that actually was quite useful because IDRC developed the process of phasing its open science or open data process. We didn't want to rush it. So based on the review, we phased our open science approach into an incremental or more phased approach. So here we're looking at steps to guide the next level of intervention or the next level of support. So we also endorse the strategy of learning by doing. And we did acknowledge that we as much as we had interest in open data science or open science, we were not there yet. So we had to take a learning by doing approach. And like I said earlier, we identified partners. So this led us to kind of embrace some principles. And these principles are what we are now using in terms of data granting processes, in terms of, for example, we realize that it's very, very important to share data. It's very important to. So from this awareness, we also realized that internally we needed to build the skills of staff. So program officers in IDRC were encouraged to work with grantees who would develop data management plans. We also supported at a reasonable level the data management plans for several grantees. We worked with them to monitor their efforts to manage and share their data. And we considered the implementation of some of this in terms of integrating it into our own processes. Now, the second and last phase was development of an initiative within IDRC. And how did we do this? We again launched another project. And this project specifically looked at strengthening data management and sharing practices, leading to data publication and then metadata records. We selected 25 research teams, provided funding for them. All those that didn't have funding to publish their data. We adopted a learning by doing methodology and Asian. Most of them were think tanks and university-based academics. We took them through the process of developing data management plans. We organized 3 webinars on data curation through regional meetings as well. We helped them prepare articles for publication by giving feedback, and also
I'll ask you to wrap up whenever
yes,
you can, Paul.
yes, I am finalizing, wrapping up now. So we also help them through the data publishing processes. So what are the next steps that IDRC is considering? For example, number 1, we have developed a guidance, a template for developing data management plans. This is now shared with our grantees. Number 2, in this process, when researchers are applying for proposals, it's a requirement that they give us what is their data management plan at the time of inception and also at the time of project implementation. So there are details towards these data management plans, and that is now integrated in the entire research process. So as we do the project approvals, the project designs, we integrate data management plans, and this is expected to help us push this to the next level. That's the learning experience from IDRC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think you summarized very well what's been going on at IDRC. Collègues au passe responsive, pouvez-vous me donner les permissions à moi pour le partage d'écran? And as soon as I get that,
dès que je suis là,
turn it over. Okay, so I'm just going to try to share.
Je vais essayer de partager.
Share what I think is the right screen. Do I have the correct screen?
Alors, est-ce que j'ai la bonne présentation?
Go to the beginning, start from the, and then turn it on to full screen. That would be good. So, thank you very much.
Alors, merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas ce qui se passe, mais je pense que ça peut être corrigé. Open Science pour les opportunités, sciences ouvertes pour les opportunités africaines. Alors, nous avons les conseils internationaux de la science ouverte, les Cheikh le Kouba du Sénégal, Joseph Mewa du Botswana, Moulia Walafo du Kenya. La science ouverte et le développement durable font passe. Alors, l'open science, c'est-à-dire la science ouverte, a beaucoup d'opportunités pour la science et pour la société. Et ces opportunités ressortent de la capacité digitale pour stocker, transmettre des informations numériques. Alors, cela permet une nouvelle ère de partage d'informations, adaptant ainsi la science à l'âge d'information. Et l'avantage de partager, si vous avez une pomme et que la pomme, si vous avez une pomme et j'en ai une et nous échangeons ces pommes, vous et moi allons chacun avoir une pomme. Mais si vous avez une idée et j'en ai une et nous échangeons ces idées, alors chacun de nous aura 2 idées. La science ouverte La science ouverte est un moyen pour déployer une intelligence collective et permettre des gains dans ces connaissances. Donc, la science ouverte paraît être compliquée, mais elle est très simple. Alors, c'est la base est la maintenance, le maintien des données scientifiques de manière rigoureuse. Alors, l'accès ouvert au registre scientifique et qui donne naissance à une ouverture à la société, ensuite à un entretien rigoureux de cette science et de cette technologie. Alors, s'il n'y a pas de science, ce qui voudrait dire qu'il n'y a aucune science ouverte. Alors, cela donne accès ouvert au registre scientifique. Les idées, les données de publication. La science ouverte, le monde scientifique serait sous-développé. Il est important de reconnaître que la science ouverte est une question de réorganisation, la manière d'opérer. Ce n'est pas simplement de mettre une organisation, mais cela nous donne une opportunité pour la science. C'est la seule complexité qui y existe et que nous vivons maintenant dans le 21e siècle et qui serait un peu plus complexe dans le siècle à venir. Dans les prochaines 50 ou 60 années, nous serons capables d'utiliser les capacités informatiques pour simuler des activités, c'est-à-dire pour simuler même les cellules, les cellules du cerveau. Nous permettrait de redéfinir les systèmes complexes que nous avions auparavant. Cela nous permettrait de mieux porter une plus grande lumière dans la compréhension de ces systèmes. Alors, la plupart des défis globaux que nous rencontrons paraissent complexes, ont un système complexe, mais bien qu'ayant un modèle intégré, faire la modélisation est mieux établie dans l'intégration des données et qui fut une problématique jusqu'à nos jours. La prochaine révolution du développement nous permet de comprendre la complexité que nous avions auparavant et nous aide à comprendre comment mieux gérer ou bien développer ce que nous aurons dans le futur. Alors, apprendre, pour cela, il y a 3 étapes. Il faudrait apprendre de l'expérience, apprendre avec l'expérience et savoir appliquer ces expériences. Voici donc une cartographie de la circulation du développement open source, de la science ouverte qui a été établie il y a une décennie. Exactement, ces informations ont été utilisées par l'usage ou bien l'apprentissage en machine. Et cela démontre voici le modèle qui a été régénéré ici. Un modèle conventionnel de la science qui fut appliqué dans les années précédentes. Et aujourd'hui, nous voyons la circulation de l'Atlantique Nord. Bien évidemment, le développement durable en tant que partie prenante des systèmes complexes et ces objectifs de développement durable se portent à tout niveau, sont applicables à tout niveau et qui dérivent des partages de données et d'informations et qui permettraient de réaliser les systèmes adéquats pour l'adaptation à la vie courante, à la vie aujourd'hui. Voici quelques exemples. Depuis les années 2019, certaines analyses ont été faites sur la projection la sécurité alimentaire, du résultat de la sécurité alimentaire en Afrique de l'Est. Nous voyons que cela est basé sur le modèle ML et nous voyons le climat, la chronologie des agricultures, et l'écologie et l'économie agricole qui a été établie par l'USAID et qui démontre un impact minimum de l'insécurité. Alors, les défis que nous rencontrons en Afrique, je m'excuse, je n'ai pas pu résister à ce diapo, mais la vérité est que l'Afrique rencontre assez de défis que nous ne pouvons, que l'on ne peut éviter.
Next slide, please. And one of the fundamental problems, of course, is managing the
L'un des
data.
problèmes fondamentaux, c'est la gestion des données. D'abord, nous avons les nouvelles données qui viennent. Et sur le côté, nous voyons l'acquisition de ces données. Et ça dépend de comment avoir les logiciels appropriés qui nous permettraient de gérer ces données qui sont reçues, ces nouvelles données qui entrent et qui sont acquises. Dans la même gestion des données, comment est-ce que cela s'applique en Afrique? Voici les indications des rapports en Afrique. Vous voyez au sud, les bulles caractérisent la qualité des données qui sont reçues et ensuite comment cela est géré et même sauvegardé. Alors, depuis, nous avons plus de 165 IRS reconnus en Afrique.
Ebola outbreak in West Africa from 2014, where a large number of international bodies and many
Alors, depuis 2014, la réponse du gouvernement à l'épidémie d'Ebola en Afrique de l'Ouest comprenait de nombreuses organisations internationales différentes. Et pendant que les organisations internationales sont entrées à discuter la question de comment fournir une réponse à cette pandémie.
Another major issue.
Un autre problème majeur, c'est ce que nous faisons avec le registre de la science. Voici des principes pour la science enregistrée. Le Conseil international de la science est composé de différents scientifiques venant de partout dans le monde qui endossent ou bien qui approuvent les décisions qui sont prises. Mais le souci est que la plupart de ces registres sont en défaillance et nous n'avons pas un accès libre, universel et abordable. Des licences ouvertes pour les archives de la science. Nous manquons de recherche fondamentale pour la publication simultanée des données et des preuves offertes. Également, la maintenance permanente des archives scientifiques, le respect des besoins des disciplines, des points qui manquent véritablement dans la gestion des registres de la science. Nous avons également besoin d'adaptabilité aux nouvelles opportunités. C'est-à-dire, avec l'avancement de l'âge, beaucoup de secteurs ont eu de l'amélioration, des développements. Mais nous utilisons encore les informations basiques pour... nous utilisons les données caduques pour une société qui est avançante et développante. Ensuite, une communauté scientifique, une accessibilité à une communauté scientifique. Quelles sont donc les solutions possibles que nous pouvons mettre en place, à laquelle nous pouvons nous adapter? Il y a une organisation que bien de vous connaissez, le réseau informatique panafricain, le réseau informatique panafricain qui est mis en place pour développer un centre de coordination des données H3 Africa, qui est une infrastructure pour développer un centre basique d'information, pour développer des informations de haute qualité, permettant aux scientifiques d'améliorer et de continuer leurs recherches. Donc, nous avons besoin d'un réseau de sciences ouvertes alors pour développer ce réseau. Alors, la stratégie STI de l'Union africaine pour l'Afrique 2024, les défis de la science africaine. Et les thèmes sont il est important que ces scientifiques travaillent ensemble afin de discuter sur les thèmes qui leur sont proposés, tels que les charges de mobilité et qui sont élevées, l'impact croissant du changement climatique, l'insécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle, la croissance urbaine et résilience, ensuite l'économie, les problèmes structurels, le faible taux de production de connaissances, 0,14% du total mondial, et le peu de masse critique et la faible collaboration intra-africaine en matière de recherche. Alors, quelle est la portée de l'ambition? Une zone de sciences ouvertes africaine qui pourrait appeler la synergie avec l'AFTA, une coordination des actions existantes et également un lancement des grands défis des données. Alors, nous avons ici nous avons l'audace et les résolutions. Nous devons mobiliser le bon état d'esprit plutôt qu'un financement plus important. L'Afrique a tout ce dont elle a besoin en termes réels, mais les Africains restent mentalement mariés à l'idée que rien ne peut bouger sans financement extérieur. Alors, la vue d'en haut, il faudrait renforcer la science africaine dans un espace scientifique africain ouvert et l'efficacité d'échelle, la création de collaboration, masse critique, la mise à l'échelle grâce au partage et la capacité ou bien les capacités et aptitudes à partager. Alors, quelle est la plateforme de la science ouverte africaine? L'objectif est une masse critique, une collaboration et l'éducation et le développement des capacités, l'engagement sociétal, les résultats de la science ouverte, des données scientifiques qui permettent à mettre en place des projets, des projets de défis internationaux et aussi avoir un soutien qui représente un point très important pour la science des données et l'intelligence, les instituts d'intelligence artificielle. Il faudrait également coordonner l'intérêt de ces institutions d'intelligence artificielle. Il faudrait une ambition de grande envergure afin de réaliser il faudrait donc convoquer et coordonner les intérêts, les idées, personnes, institutions et ressources pour la science ouverte en Afrique et pour l'Afrique. Je pense que pendant cette présentation, nous avons entendu beaucoup de termes, des informations très intéressantes et le besoin d'ambition réelle pour pouvoir se lancer dans la réalisation ou bien l'acquisition de la science ouverte. For our colleagues who are in the floor.
Un peu plus de temps que prévu et je sais qu'on accuse un retard, mais est-ce qu'on peut prendre une ou deux questions rapides? Je sais pas qu'est-ce que vous en pensez, je suis à vos ordres.
OK, merci Mathieu. Je pense qu'on pourrait prendre quand même deux questions s'il y a des personnes qui souhaitent interroger un des panélistes. Vu que nous sommes un peu en retard également ici sur l'heure, donc s'il y a des personnes qui veulent intervenir, des observations et des questions. OK, Mathieu, on a une question dans le public ici.
Allez-y.
OK, merci. Alors, ma question s'adresse à Dr Sepo de l'Afrique du Sud. Alors, je pense que il disait qu'ils ne sont pas avancés en matière de sciences ouvertes, mais par rapport aux autres pays africains, je pense que du boulot a été fait. Alors, donc, je voulais savoir si pour des cas particuliers de responsables prévus qui souhaitent mettre à disposition tenu de leurs travaux, qu'est-ce qui est fait pour eux? Quelle sorte de soutien est fait pour eux? Et si ça n'a pas été encore entrepris, qu'est-ce qu'ils comptent faire à cet effet?
Seppo, over to you. I don't know if you got the translation, but it was about what support is either provided or envisaged for researchers that want to make their results public in South Africa.
Thanks, Matthew. Are made as incentives, that part of them, they're incentives aligned to the number of publications that a researcher does. As part of that, depending on how many publications the researcher has, there's incentives that's tied to mobility and other scholarships for students, etc., that the researcher can use to grow their portfolio within the science space. Within the NRF, as I said, we provide grants to researchers. We are largest funder, if you speak of the public funder to research. So that as well just provides that besides just the open access one, just provides the enabler for the research to be conducted in a proper way with the right support from the government. And what we've been driving for over the past and what we haven't done very well compared to other funders is the issue on impact, where now we've developed strategies in terms of what does impact look within the lens of the NRF funding, and how do we put in mechanisms or pathways to guide researchers towards that lens of impact. I'm not sure if I picked up all your questions, Matthew. I can see the calendar is being showed. I'm not sure whose calendar it is.
Thanks very much. No, I think you answered all the questions very well. So
and maybe just a last one, I can be able to share in detail through Passphrase in terms of the type of incentives that are there through the DHEAD and some of the mechanisms that we have within the NRF and the strategy that we're developing at the moment. So the strategy and the thinking around it, just to share the modalities and the processes that we've followed so far.
Perfect. Est-ce qu'on prend une dernière question de la salle, si vous souhaitez, et après je vais clore la session.
Il y a une question dans la salle. Professeur Alassane Ouattara.
Thank you all for your presentation. I have a question for Dr. Sepo. I have good understanding of opening access, opening data, but my concern is about opening reviewer and evaluation. I hope that you have experienced this kind of approach. What come up? What the conclusion? Because according to me, when you open this, let's say, approach reviewer and authors? Sometimes you have some concerns, some problems, some issues. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's a very interesting question and very sensitive. It's got pros and cons, of course. But the bottom line, as I think Jeffrey mentioned, is how do we start to rethink the model of reviewing, not just reviewing with regards to whether it's blind reviews or the reviewer does and the authors know it, but open science now can bring up those conversations where we start thinking within the science and broader society to say, what does review mean? What are the ethical issues around it? How do we rethink how we review? And how do we promote the current challenges that are there within the review process? So what I proposed, what I shared earlier on, that's just a proposition based on the NRF. Not everything, of course, will be adopted. The next phase that we need to do now, well, that we're going towards now, is now engaging with the universities and the researchers aligned to these modalities of open reviews. Are they comfortable with it? If we drive for that agenda, how do we drive? It shouldn't just be from the national perspective. It's also supposed to look at the international perspective. What are the common best practices in the world? How do we leverage that? If you look at reviews, mostly we use reviewers from everywhere in the world. It's not just restricted to South Africa or Ivory Coast. So those dimensions have to be thought through. We don't yet have the answers now, but the whole proposition is that we're putting on the table is, e.g., what's your thought as researchers on this issue around open reviews? And as I mentioned, it's beyond just making authors and the reviewer's name public. It's also thinking around the review panel, increasing participation within those review panels of non-academic participants to be part of those reviews. And then as well, being cognizant of the different policies within the national perspectives. E.g., in South Africa, we've got a policy now, a national policy that is on data, looks at data sharing, etc. in terms of contacts. It's called POPIA. So how do we try to but how do we try to come up with policies that don't conflict the national policy on data sharing or sharing of information via WhatsApp, contacts, etc. We align to it, but at the same time, we try to push the agenda for science without completely going against it, not going against it, but having this conversation within the science fraternity to say, how do we approach the review process? From my side, personally, I think it can be a good thing, because one of the barriers within the science system is, e.g., if somebody is within the universities, as an example, you find that there's issues around the ethical perspective around, if you don't know the reviewer as an author, or if the reviewer knows you, there's those few instances where, based on the biases of the reviewers, using that, because they are not known, they are using that as a basis to reject or to provide comments that are not in line with those principles of reviewing. So it might not even be the issues around just the reviewer names. It might also be the issues around what we already do at the NRF. If a review is done, making that review public, so we can remove the name of the reviewer, but the review comments are public. Thanks a lot, Matthew.
Thank you very much, and merci pour les questions dans la salle. Je pense qu'on a eu une session très, très intéressante qui donnera lieu à plus de discussions dans l'avenir. Thank you so much to our panelists, et je vous souhaite une bonne continuation dans ce colloque très important. Merci.
Merci, Mathieu.
Thank you.
Ok, je pense que ainsi terminé cette session, nous allons passer à la session jumelée. Donc, je vais inviter le professeur Ndi s'il est dans la salle. Professeur Ndi, vous êtes invité pour entamer la nouvelle session avec les pistes de ce matin. En attendant qu'il arrive, déjà, il y a une information à faire passer pour les différents participants. Dès que vous avez un petit temps, essayez de passer au niveau du secrétariat du fonds STI pour quelque chose. Ils sont déjà là. Il y a le docteur Okoma qui est là. Oui. Et le docteur Guibula. OK. Oui. Juste après le professeur Ondi, nous aurons la session, la suite de la session avec le professeur Umtanaga, qui a également 2 panélistes.
Merci bien, docteur Annette Ouattara, pour la parole que vous me donnez. Alors, nous aurons avec tout à l'heure l'intervention de nos 2 personnalités ici présentes sur l'implication nationale et stratégie de la promotion de la science ouverte en Côte d'Ivoire et la politique et pratique en matière de sciences ouvertes. Alors, qui sont nos 2 conférenciers maintenant? Alors, je vais commencer par vous présenter. Dr Okoma Djeya Muriel Joël. Voilà, donc je commence par la dame. Alors, Dr Okoma Djeya Muriel Joël, elle est docteure en biochimie et sciences des aliments de l'Université Félix Houphouët-Boigny. Dr Okoma est chargée de recherche et elle a une dizaine d'articles publiés dans des revues internationales. Elle est actuellement sous-directrice chargée de la diffusion de l'information scientifique, la documentation et l'archivage à la Direction générale de la recherche et de l'innovation au ministère de l'Enseignement supérieur et de la recherche scientifique. Donc, c'est avec Dr Okoma que nous allons traiter du sujet de l'implication nationale et stratégie de la promotion de la science ouverte en Côte d'Ivoire. En ce qui concerne le docteur Guibula Karim, il est docteur en géophysique externe de l'Université Norbert Zongo, Burkina Faso. Il a fait une riche carrière dans l'enseignement secondaire en occupant plusieurs postes, notamment celui d'inspecteur de l'enseignement secondaire. Et il est actuellement enseignant-chercheur à l'Université virtuelle du Burkina Faso. Voilà donc les 2 personnalités qui vont ce soir nous traiter. Le docteur, Guibula Karim, va traiter de sujets de politique et pratique en matière de sciences ouvertes. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vais donner la parole au docteur Joël Muriel pour sa présentation.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je n'utilise pas votre Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Monsieur le secrétaire général du Fonds STI, monsieur le conseiller technique du ministre de l'Enseignement supérieur supérieur du Burkina Faso, chers participants, en vos rangs, grades et qualités, bonsoir. Nous avons l'insigne honneur de représenter ce jour le directeur général de la recherche et de l'innovation, qui devait être des nôtres aujourd'hui, mais malheureusement, il représente en ce moment même la Côte d'Ivoire au Ghana. Et donc, notre présentation, elle va s'articuler autour du thème implication nationale et stratégie de promotion de la science ouverte en Côte d'Ivoire. Et le thème que nous allons suivre, prochaine diapo. Voilà. D'abord, nous allons présenter la DGRI ainsi que la vision de la recherche scientifique en Côte d'Ivoire, suivie de l'implication du gouvernement ivoirien dans l'open science ou la science ouverte. Et enfin, avant de conclure, nous présenterons quelques actions de promotion de la science en Côte d'Ivoire. Mais avant, il défile là-bas. OK. Bon. Mais avant...
Before then, let's define what is open science according to our conception. So we say that it's a concept born of the new opportunities offered by a digital revolution for sharing and dissemination scientific contents. And what are the interests of open science? It contributes to increasing the credibility of research in society, an issue whose importance was highlighted by the health crisis. They bear a profound movement towards the democratization of knowledge for the benefit of organizations, companies, and citizens. What does it involve? What does this open science involve? It involves making research results accessible to all, and this visibility of results is determined in the vision of national policy, through the General Division for Research and Innovation. So the vision of scientific research in Côte d'Ivoire is to promote scientific research and innovations for the socio-economic development of Côte d'Ivoire. And it has as objectives to develop excellent scientific researches and quality innovations able to supporting the country's key development sectors, which is the NDP. And to meet these goals, it has 4 missions. First, being to design and coordinate the national scientific research policy in Côte d'Ivoire, then supervising and monitoring and evaluating the national research programs, then enhancing the results of research and innovation, and finally, transferring technologies for the development of scientific and innovation clusters. So to better undertake this mission, the GDRI is divided under 3 sub-directions: general management, central management, and branches. And to these 2 central managements, we have 6 sub-managements, of which one is dedicated to scientific information dissemination. So Its mission is to ensure the collection, the processing, and dissemination of scientific and technological information through the inventory of scientific and technology department. It's also in charge of establishing an effective mechanism for archiving and protecting the national scientific heritage. And finally, to promote scientific literacy through the organization of science and technology conferences, strengthening scientific literacy. So in this division, we have a diagnosis, we have undertaking diagnosis and solutions. And under each problem, we identify problems, and under each problem, we were able to map out our solutions. The first problem we found was the low visibility of research and innovation activities to the public and the private sector. And as a solution proposal, we have suggested to set up a dedicated service to the communication on activities from structures in charge of researches, and also organize the international scientific and technology conferences. Also, we identified little interactions between research stakeholders and no real database on research potential and innovation. And as solution, we suggested the IPSC which will be describing, will appear as a tool to resolve this issue. The third problem we have identified is that there's no real monitoring and evaluation assessment of research activities and structuring research projects. For this, we suggest to establish a monitoring and evaluation unit cell to monitor NRPs and research structures within the framework of the program budget. Fourth point, fourth issue, scientific research is compartmentalized and disparate, little mutualization, interdisciplinarity. And for this, we have decided to develop, implement the development of a community-based research capacity. And a fifth problem is the low socioeconomic value of research that could be solved by the creation of scientific and innovation points. And the last problem, which is the most important, insufficient funding for scientific research. And the solution for this is to stimulate the generation of own resources, boost a partnership with the private sector, but also one of the innovation of the GDRI is that we are presently implementing what we call the virtual market on research in Côte d'Ivoire. We'll get back to this point. All these identified issues helped us to define the main lines of the scientific research strategy in Côte d'Ivoire. So the goal is for the ministry through the GDRI to create clusters of competencies, within universities, institutes, and research centers. And these clusters of competence should cover the national program of researches which are of national interest. And these national programs will help us to create community resources for research, for the researcher. So what do we mean by community resources for researchers? Research observatories, national analysis centers, national computing centers, and also museum of biodiversity. Then the creation of these community resources for research should lead to science and innovation clusters. What is the Ivorian government involvement in open science? The engagement of higher education and scientific research ministry in October 2018 in the open access and open science movement as a member country of West and Central African Research and Education Network. We also had the creation. We also have the creation of the telecommunication network for higher education and research in 2011 and deployed in 2012. We also had the creation in 2015 of the Virtual University of Côte d'Ivoire that has a political will of the state to develop a digital in higher education. We also had the opening of scientific collaboration with other public and even private universities, and also the development of the use of ICT through the implementation of the LMD system. So what are the different promotion actions of the Ivorian government open science? There's the existence of 4 Ivorian open access journals, the promotion of the virtual library in partnership that is hosted by the Virtual University of Côte d'Ivoire. It has more than 15,000 records, which allowed the digitization of so many of theses and dissertations in public universities in partnership with the MTN Foundation. Besides that, besides these actions, we had 3 main activities for the promotion of science that GGRI is presently executing. Mainly, ICPT, Inventory of Scientific Potential and Technological. In this analysis, we said earlier that one of the main challenges we are facing is funding insufficiency, which is linked to the lack of awareness of the research offer. Lack of awareness of the research offer. And as a solution to this problem, IPSC appears as a tool that will help us to identify the research potential for scientific and innovation in Côte d'Ivoire. Therefore, IPSC has as a goal to identify, first of all the research structures that has been created on the national territory, identify their valued results, have an inventory of their different infrastructures and equipment destined to the research activities, and also gather all the identify human resources that will help to the research and innovation of. So what are the interests of the IS? It is the research unit leaders have as a goal for valuable comparative material for the management of science and technology activities. It helps us, the researchers, to know the research projects in progress, to development planners. IPSC is considered as a database for decision support, and also to researchers. IPSC is an essential tool for market creation. It also enables us to make the transition over the creation of the virtual research market in Côte d'Ivoire, of which DGRI is executing these days. What is the virtual research market? According to our conception, the virtual market will be introduced as a platform through which the entire information will transit for the service of Ivorian researchers. It will be a space through which will be a place of exchange where the offer and demands of the Ivorian research will meet in a dematerialized way. The objectives are targeted by DGRI with the implementation of this market is to ensure continuity and permanence of the interaction between research and industry in Côte d'Ivoire, matching research supply with the needs of the private sector, socio-economic valorization of research. Then ensure the continuity and permanence of CEPRI's activities. CEPRI is Research and Innovation Promotion Week. And this market has as aim to support the financing and promotion of Ivorian research. So the process of setting up the virtual market relies on three different steps. First of all, is to identify and characterize the demands, the needs in terms of scientific research before the formal private sector, and also local communities before the government and population. Then identify and characterize the research offers through the IPST, and finally manage, implement a regulatory organism for the security of all these memorandum. The third activity is the organization of the International Science and Technology Fortnight called the ICTW. What is the ICTW? It is a scientific event for research is organized by the DGII within 2 weeks. So it's 2 weeks to promote science, 2 weeks to promote works and researches, 2 weeks of capacity building on technology and science and culture, 2 weeks to magnify science and technology. Its objective is to inform population policymakers, students, and high school students about the activities carried out in the research institutions, make the service provided by research and innovation more visible to the public, making research and innovation more attractive for young people, and to encourage vocations in science, particularly among girls. To round it up, we say that Côte d'Ivoire is committed to taking up the challenge of visibility and dissemination of scientific production and data by making them accessible to the various components of society through the DGRI missions, which is expressed by the organization of IPST, KISS, creation of virtual research markets, then the creation of the UVCI, which hosts the virtual library, So we're saying the embryonic experience of Côte d'Ivoire should be strengthened. This seminar is an opportunity to pool and share experiences already proven at a regional and international level. So it's on this hoping note that we will conclude our presentation. Thank you very much.
Au milieu.
rate of publication of articles over free access and publication of theses on free access and also a low rate of educational resources in free access. The principal challenges we encountered for open science in Burkina Faso are mainly for the dissemination in free access is a lack of knowledge on the tools and the framework for the publication of this free access. This lack of knowledge is based on the fact that there's no proper policy implemented for the operation of this activity. And also there's a lack of communication in terms of open science. And let's note that as a challenge, we have challenges on the tools for the publication of free access the data. Then the confidentiality of data to be disseminated. The survey has shown that there are researchers that think that their results are so confidential to put them at the availability to the public. And also we had the challenges of financial resources for the publication of articles. Then for the access to free access resources, we have challenges linked to resources. We have the bad quality of internet connection and the lack of knowledge of keywords in order to have access to these free access information. So as a suggestion for better practices in terms of open science, we have to undertake actions to promote open access to help for the dissemination of information and have access to the open source. Some actions that have been undertaken are mainly the launching of digital university in Burkina Faso, where more than 25,000 scientific documents have been made available to the public as free access. Then we had the creation of a virtual university, of which besides the courses on that is being given, has taken up the challenge of training scientists and making the digital information accessible to everyone, and to promote information ITs in the academic field. Also implement platforms to host quality education over free access.
Ok, donc ici c'était la bibliothèque numérique de
This
l'université.
is the digital library of the university. So I was talking about the creation of virtual university, of which beside the courses, the training is being given, we have the capacity building of professors and teachers over digital studies and the promotion of ITs in academic areas, academic field for sure.
Ok. Voilà, donc, il faut noter qu'en 2 ans,
We have to note that within 2 years of existence, the virtual university has been able to implement a platform for the entire universities of Burkina Faso. So presently, all the universities from Burkina Faso have a platform where teachers and trainers can insert information and data for free access. So these were the different platforms which the virtual university has made available for all universities in Burkina Faso. Also, there are trainers training in the knowledge and assessment of digital information. So during the session 2020 session, there more than 268 trainers and researchers were trained to the production of educational resources. As a perspective, the virtual university in terms of open sources, we have the launching of the digital platform. We have the digital library, which is almost ready and available to everyone. Then the building of open digital spaces or infrastructures, which are places the public will have a quality internet connection for a better research. So the virtual university has already built 16 digital infrastructures. So on this note, thank you very much for your kind attention. Thanks a lot. Due to the short time we have, let's receive Professor Ontanaga for the other 2 conferences. Then we will address our questions to the 4 panelists. Probably you will get back to the public, or you can stay here.
Allô. Voilà. Monsieur Ekra.
Mr. Ekra, Jacques Auger. Is that correct? Mrs. Koulibaly, Cécile, from the Virtual University, please come to the rostrum. Thank you. Good afternoon once more to them. He is the Director for National Office for International Propriety. They are in charge of licensing all our publications and inventions. There's a lot done through the communications throughout the Ivorian academia, but the results are not inadequate. are not adequate. What is the Ivorian Office for Intellectual Propriety? It is an entity created by Decree 2005 to govern international property. They are the representatives of International Propriety Organization, IPO, and the Global Intellectual Property Organization. And then to my left, we have Mr. Ekra Jacques Roger, who is the manager of that agency. Who is Mr. Ekra Jacques Roger? He was Vice Dean in charge of pedagogy at Legal Sciences of the University of Cocody from 2013 to 2017. He was in charge. He served as Director for Legal Affairs at the Ministry of Industry and Mining. And since 2017, he is the Director of the Intellectual Property Organization. He's going to be discussing rights related to research or academic publications. And then we have Mrs. Koulibaly Cecile from the Virtual University. They are in vogue today, those universities. Mrs. Cecile is in charge, has been speaker
ouverte en collaboration avec le WAC.
At Open Access,
également l'ensemble des activités et des programmes, c'est-à-dire l'information électronique pour les bibliothèques en Côte d'Ivoire.
Electronic information for libraries.
De l'Association pour l'information et les
libraries.
AILA et présidente de la section du consortium des bibliothèques. Voilà. Voilà. C'est pas ordre. Et ensuite, on passera à Madame. Hein? Ouais, bon.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Let me appreciate and recognize everyone from the floor and express to what extent our agency is delighted to be part of these events. For not being invited to the various sessions that were held since. And we actually complained, and through the mediation of the ministry, the Minister of Industry, I think he was able to reach out to your minister to the extent that through the appropriate channels we hear now. FONSTI, in my opinion, and an international property organization, IPO, should work hand in hand, because innovative property and what is known today as, how do you call it? Someone said it, I'm a little bit disturbed calling it science, open science, because I don't know whether there is something like closed science. I do recognize that you really are not coming up with a definition of open science. Maybe we need to deep dive into that. Therefore, mine is going to be around 3 pillars. The first intro, first session is going to be intro, basics on intellectual property, and then we will get to the concept of innovations and rights that are pertinent to protection of intellectual property, and then the economic incentives, and then we will wrap up with recommendations. With regard to the basics on the intellectual property, a few conceptual definitions. Intellectual property, you can see that the first ingredient, the first thing, is that it aims at the works of the spirit, and it is actually a recognition of a right.
Les idées, quelle que soit votre idée, elle est
on every creation, no matter what your idea is, protected by intellectual property.
It is your rêve,
a property, all these.
Que tout ce qu'on pense, on en est le propriétaire. Alors,
Everything that if you could
la propriété
license
intellectuelle
your
se
tools to
présente
be a
dans deux.
billionaire, because construct your mind as an idea, you are an owner of that.
On
So
connaît
literally,
plutôt sous le nom de droit d'auteur et de droit voisin, et la propriété industrielle que l'on connaît sur les droits, les créations techniques et les signes distinctifs. Alors, deux mots sur la propriété littéraire et artistique. En principe, elle relève de l'Office citoyen de la propriété intellectuelle. Mais en réalité, on ne peut pas la gérer puisque la différence entre les deux est que la propriété littéraire et artistique, elle existe du seul fait qu'elle soit créée. Dès que vous l'avez créée, elle existe, elle est protégée. Vous faites un discours, c'est de la propriété intellectuelle. On n'a pas besoin de la matérialiser et de l'enregistrer quelque part pour qu'elle soit protégée. Et donc là, justement, on est déjà même dans la science, j'allais dire, virtuelle, puisqu'elle n'est pas matérialisée. Par contre, la propriété industrielle a besoin d'être matérialisée pour être protégée. Elle doit prendre une forme. On doit pouvoir la voir. Et donc, la réglementation en la matière, on passe à la, concerne surtout la propriété industrielle. Le droit d'auteur, il suffit de, comme on dit, de chanter quelque part, et puis ça y est, on a le droit d'auteur. Alors, quel est le cadre institutionnel législatif? Donc, au plan national, on a parlé de l'Office citoyen de la propriété intellectuelle, mais qui est le pendant de l'Organisation africaine de la propriété intellectuelle, qui est l'organe qui administre toute la propriété. Il faut savoir que la propriété intellectuelle a une caractéristique juridique importante, elle est territoriale. Ça veut dire que si votre droit est reconnu en Côte d'Ivoire, il n'est pas forcément reconnu en France ou ailleurs. Il faut des conventions pour qu'elle soit reconnue. Et donc, c'est territorial. L'innovation, si encore on peut parler d'innovation parce que ça date de 1962, en tout cas, la particularité de l'OAPI, c'est que les 17 États membres de l'OAPI ne forment qu'un seul territoire. Titre, on va voir tout à l'heure, votre brevet est protégé en Côte d'Ivoire, est protégé dans les 17 États qui sont la plupart des États francophones et les États lusophones, la Guinée-Bissau et l'État hispanophone, la Guinée équatoriale. Voilà. Et donc, le principal accord, c'est l'accord de Bangui qui a évolué. Et sur le plan international, on l'a dit, il y a l'Organisation mondiale de la propriété intellectuelle et puis un autre élément de l'ONU, puisque ce sont des organisations de l'ONU, l'Organisation mondiale du commerce. Elle est concernée dans la propriété intellectuelle parce qu'il y a des accords ADPICI, ça veut dire accords sur les droits de propriété intellectuelle dans le commerce. C'est comment on protège les éléments qu'on vend dans le commerce par la propriété intellectuelle. Notamment actuellement, il y a tout le débat sur la libéralisation de la vente et de la fabrication des brevets, en fait des sérums sur la COVID-19. Bon, voilà les différents textes qui sont là. Alors, en ce qui concerne notre point le plus important, qu'est-ce qu'on appelle invention et invention? Alors, l'invention pour nous, diapo suivante s'il vous plaît, c'est lorsqu'une solution nouvelle est apportée à un problème technique que l'on vit. C'est ça qu'on appelle l'invention. Il faut que ce soit nouveau. On va revenir sur cet élément. Le droit de propriété qui protège l'invention, c'est d'abord, vous voyez, l'auteur, que pour faire l'invention, il faut écrire quelque part. Littéraire et artistique, c'est le droit d'auteur. Et ensuite, la propriété industrielle, au sens propre du terme, on a le brevet d'invention. Lorsque l'activité inventive est suffisante, comme on dit, c'est une question de degré. Les certificats d'addition pour un complément à une unité déjà inventée. Et puis, le certificat de modèle d'utilité, qu'on appelle aussi petit brevet. Ce sont les inventions d'activités moins importantes. Par exemple, si vous trouvez vous avez un BIC, vous trouvez un moyen de faire en sorte que ce BIC peut être mis dans votre poche plus facilement ou alors qu'il puisse vous permettre d'écrire quand vous penchez, alors ça sera un modèle d'utilité. Et puis, bien sûr, il y a le secret professionnel qui permet de protéger. Cette fois-ci, l'état du secret professionnel, on parle ici justement de connaissances mises à la disposition, c'est de permettre aux propriétaires de cette idée de ne pas la diffuser. Ne pas la diffuser. Le plus grand secret professionnel, entre guillemets, que vous connaissez, que vous utilisez tous, c'est Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola n'a jamais déposé un titre d'invention de son produit. Jamais, jamais, jamais. Ils ne le feront jamais. Donc, personne au monde peut dire qu'il connaît la formule du Coca-Cola. Les seules personnes qui connaissent, on ne sait même pas où elles sont et la formule est enfermée quelque part. Et donc, votre science ouverte, ici, vous voyez qu'elle a des limites lorsque vous en avez parlé. Parce que problème de marché, de mise en valeur de cette propriété. Alors, ensuite, les typologies d'invention, ça concerne les produits, les procédés, l'utilisation d'un procédé, l'accord de Bangui. Et tous ces éléments donnent des conditions de protégeabilité. L'invention doit être vraiment nouvelle. Elle doit disposer de ce qu'on appelle une activité inventive. Ça veut dire qu'il ne faut pas que ça soit trivial, comme on dit, que tout le monde sache que c'est ça, que ce soit évident pour tout le monde. Et ça, c'est le côté le plus difficile à démontrer. De faire quelque chose que auquel personne n'avait pensé avant vous. Et que personne ne peut trouver ça dans la rue. Par exemple, souvent ça c'est dans le domaine, on voit une plante, il dit j'ai découvert une plante. Ça, c'est pas vrai. On n'a rien inventé. La plante, elle existe là. Voilà. C'est pour ça que dans ce domaine, on a appelé ce qu'on appelle les nouvelles espèces végétales que l'on crée à partir d'espèces qui existent. Ça, c'est une invention. Enfin, il faut que, et c'est ça aussi un des éléments importants, il faut que cette invention puisse faire l'objet d'une application industrielle. Si on invente ça et qu'on ne peut pas le dupliquer, c'est pas une invention. Exemple, sans vouloir remettre en cause ce que cette personne a fait, celui qui a inventé ce qu'on appelle la décabosseuse de cabosse de cacao. Il avait appelé, pour ceux qui s'en souviennent, il appelait ça décaboigny, quelque chose comme ça. Mais ça ne peut pas être breveté. Parce que le modèle qu'il a fait ne peut pas être dupliqué. Ce n'est pas possible. Tel qu'il a conçu, ça ne pouvait pas être dupliqué. On ne pouvait pas en faire une invention, une application industrielle. Enfin, diapo suivante, voilà, la loi énumère, justement pour ne pas connaître des problèmes, ce qui ne peut pas faire l'objet de protection par brevet, donc la propriété intellectuelle, on ne peut pas s'en prévaloir. Les découvertes, surtout scientifiques, les méthodes mathématiques, tout ce qui touche le corps humain, parce que en droit, on dit chez nous, le corps humain est hors commerce. Donc, on ne peut pas faire des inventions sur le corps humain. Les créations esthétiques, ornementales, les plans, etc., les programmes d'ordinateur, ça, c'est une grande différence entre le système, j'allais dire, européen dont on a hérité et le système américain. Les Américains admettent que les programmes d'ordinateur peuvent faire l'objet de brevets. Dans la loi pays et la loi européenne, puisqu'on est attaché à eux, dans l'OMPI, généralement, les brevets, les programmes d'ordinateur ne peuvent pas faire l'objet de brevets, donc de protection intellectuelle par le brevet. Maintenant, si vous pouvez utiliser un autre élément comme les marques, etc., ou alors la propriété littéraire artistique comme protection, d'accord, mais jamais par le brevet. Ensuite, les simples signes de présentation, enfin, j'ai préféré énumérer ça parce que nous sommes là justement dans le virtuel. Ouais. Tous ces éléments-là ne peuvent pas être protégés par le brevet. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'ils ne peuvent pas être protégés. Hein. Ils peuvent être protégés, mais par un autre système, pas par le brevet. Enfin, on va aller un peu plus vite. Les procédures, et ça, on en a parlé tout à l'heure. Il faut d'abord demande élaborer, c'est-à-dire ça vous les éléments constitutifs de la demande. Il faut la déposer le titre est délivré et ensuite le titre est publié. Et une fois que le titre est publié, vous pouvez revendiquer la propriété intellectuelle du brevet. La demande, comment elle se présente? Voilà, il y a un des formulaires, il y a un pli, et puis l'élément dont on en a parlé tout à l'heure, le coût, 590 000 francs CFA pour le brevet et 50 000 francs CFA pour le modèle d'utilité. Il est à noter que les États de l'OAPI accordent une subvention aux ressortissants, c'est-à-dire à toutes les personnes, quelle que soit leur nationalité, hein, qui vivent sur le territoire de l'OAPI ont droit à une subvention. Les personnes physiques, ça va jusqu'à 80% de prise en charge et les personnes morales, comme les universités, etc., ça va jusqu'à 40% de prise en charge des coûts de protection du brevet. Bien sûr, ça, le mandataire, c'est quand on passe par une personne. Ensuite, sur le plan international, parce que, je vous ai dit tout de suite, la propriété intellectuelle est territoriale. Si vous êtes protégé dans l'OAPI, vous n'êtes pas protégé en Europe, ou aux États-Unis, ou en Chine, ou ailleurs. Et donc, l'OMPI a mis en place une série de traités qui permettent d'élargir la protection d'un brevet en dehors de l'espace OAPI. Je ne vais pas rentrer dans les détails. Je vais vous donner un schéma tout à l'heure. Allons-y. Voilà, le schéma qui vous permet de déposer, de protéger un brevet sur le plan international, avec les délais, etc., etc. Vous aurez, je pense, la communication pour regarder ça plus lentement. Ensuite, voilà, quels sont les droits? Le premier des droits, c'est le droit d'exploiter l'invention. Mais attention, ce droit n'est pas automatique. Il faut pouvoir être véritablement le propriétaire, c'est-à-dire que quelqu'un peut vous interdire d'exploiter l'invention. Vous avez le droit, bien sûr, donc, d'interdire l'exploitation sans votre consentement. Vous avez le droit de mettre l'invention en location, c'est ce qu'on appelle la licence. Vous pouvez la vendre ou la céder comme vous voulez, puisque c'est un droit de propriété. C'est un droit patrimonial, comme on dit chez nous. Ensuite, voilà, appartient le problème de la titularité du droit. Le principe, c'est que c'est le déposant qui est propriétaire. Donc, en réalité, ce n'est pas la personne qui a fait le dépôt matériellement, c'est la personne au nom de laquelle le dépôt est fait qui est propriétaire. Et il y a la copropriété ou alors la transmission du brevet par voie successorale. Ensuite, voilà le problème qui se pose et sur lequel je voudrais qu'on s'arrête une minute. C'est lorsque le brevet est fait dans le cadre, j'allais dire, professionnel. On fait la distinction entre le titulaire du brevet, c'est-à-dire la personne qui a dépensé pour obtenir le brevet, et puis le chercheur que nous sommes et qui a fait le brevet. Lui, il a le droit moral. On peut dire aussi le droit de la propriété littéraire et artistique. Mais le principe est que le brevet appartient à celui qui l'a financé. Donc, si vous travaillez dans une université, que vous avez fait une invention et que vous la faites breveter, le principe, c'est que ça appartient à l'université ou au centre de recherche qui a mis à votre disposition tous les moyens d'obtenir le brevet. C'est peut-être une question sur laquelle il faudra qu'on discute plus profondément. Mais peut-être que j'avance un peu. Lorsque l'OIPI fait le tour des universités pour leur donner, disons, des éléments sur la propriété intellectuelle, deux choses. Avec l'OMPI et l'OIPI, il y a en place ce qu'on appelle des lignes directrices pour l'expression de la propriété et à suivre que l'on met à votre disposition. Toutes les universités de Côte d'Ivoire, jusqu'à présent, je n'ai pas eu de retour de mes visites, puisque à chaque fois que je fais des visites, je demande que les universités se rapprochent de nous pour qu'on mette en place tout le mécanisme. C'est un mécanisme, la rémunération du chercheur, etc., etc. Enfin, il y a tout un ensemble de processus juridiques qu'il faut mettre en place.
Recording in progress.
access to